So, the series of videos is meant to serve as your introduction to the academic field of comic studies. As I pointed out in Issue 0, in your academic careers, whenever you encounter a field that is unfamiliar to you, two of the first steps are to learn terminology and frameworks of analysis. This semester, we'll be reading Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics to learn much more about both those aspects of the specific academic field of comic studies. If that sounds at all intimidating, though, learning terminology and frameworks for analysis for a new academic field, let me assure you that it can be just as easy as reading a handful of William Kerner's Hugo Hercules comic strips. Now, even if you're already familiar with comics, you're probably not yet familiar with Hugo Hercules. Here are the bullet points. Hugo Hercules was a comic strip written and drawn by William Big Bill Kerner. It was published in the Chicago Tribune newspaper from 1902 to 1903. Hugo Hercules appeared in 18 Sunday comic strips, 16 solo adventures, and 2 crossovers with other characters in the surprisingly shared universe of the Chicago Tribune's comic supplement. As comic studies has developed as an academic field, the historic significance of this comic strip has become more widely acknowledged. However, the exact nature of that significance depends on one's definition of the term superhero. In the estimation of comics creator Alan Moore, author of Watchmen, the character of Hugo Hercules is the first American superhero. However, in the judgment of comics scholar Peter Coogan, author of Superhero, The Secret Origin of a Genre, he can claim only the more modest title of the first positive representation of a heroic Superman in comics. But in either case, Hugo Hercules is a first, a significant case study in the development of the American superhero. Before we attempt to analyze a comic, such as this strip titled Hugo Hercules to the Rescue Once More, we should first learn a little terminology. So, comics are composed of panels, which are read from left to right and from top to bottom. In their most fundamental form, panels are boxes, each representing a moment in time. So, on this Hugo Hercules strip, I'm going to use a purple pen to outline the panels. We would read the sequence of panels from left to right. So I'm drawing an arrow leading from left to right. And I'm numbering the panels in order as 1, 2, and 3. Each of these 3 panels, we would read from left to right and from top to bottom. So I'm drawing a diagonal line from the top left corner to the bottom right corner of each panel. Now, the panels in comics are separated by gutters, which are the spaces in between them. On this strip, I'm going to use a green pen to indicate the 2 gutters. If each of the panels represents a moment in time, then each gutter represents the time that passes in between those moments. So essentially, in comics, space is time. A typical panel is composed of a combination of words and pictures. The words tend to belong to one of three categories, at least two of which we see in this Hugo Hercules comic strip. The first category of words, which we do see here, is dialogue. Think of dialogue as words spoken in the story by characters. Dialogue tends to be enclosed in circular balloons with tails leading to the mouths of the characters speaking the words inside of them. On the first panel of this Hugo Hercules strip, I am using a dark blue pen to highlight the two dialogue balloons and their tails. The second category of words, which I would argue we do see here, are thoughts. While dialogue is external, that is, the words that go out of the characters' mouths, thoughts are internal. That is, the words that stay in the characters' minds. In more modern comics, to differentiate them from dialogue, thoughts tend to be enclosed in cloud-shaped balloons with a trail of little circles leading toward the minds of the characters thinking the words inside them. So on the second panel of this strip, I'm using a light blue pen to draw a cloud around the thoughts of the character Hugo Hercules and a trail of little circles leading toward his mind. The third category of words, which you could argue we either do or do not see in this Hugo Hercules comic strip, is narration. Think of narration as words spoken about the story by a narrator. In more modern comics, narration tends to be enclosed in boxes. The argument you can make about this particular comic strip is that Hugo Hercules is not only a character in it, but also the narrator of it. In which case, I could have used a different light blue pen to enclose those words at the bottom of each panel in a box, instead of in a cloud-shaped thought balloon. So, just for the sake of that argument, on the third panel of this strip, I'm using a different light blue pen to draw a box around Hugo Hercules' thoughts. And under both the thought balloon, under the second panel, and the narration box under the third panel, I'm writing a question mark to indicate that the distinction is a little unclear here. In a more modern comic book, you might take a look at in one of my classes, such as the first appearance of the character Captain Marvel in Whiz Comics number 2 from 1940, or the first appearance of the character Black Panther in Fantastic Four number 52 from 1966. The use of narration boxes and thought balloons makes it much easier to differentiate between narration and thought. Now, for the purposes of our first framework of analysis this semester, the picture in each panel can be separated into at least two layers. We'll call the first layer of each picture the foreground. So this is the part of the picture that appears to be nearest to the reader. Whoever or whatever is in the foreground of the picture is often drawn to look bigger and to have more detail. On the third panel of this comic strip, I'm using a darker red pen to indicate the foreground. Where we see Hugo Hercules, the man, the old guy he saved from the falling safe, and that man's daughter. And I'm using the red pen to also circle a couple interesting details in the foreground. The money that the man is offering to Hugo, as well as the embrace that the daughter is giving him, both as rewards for his heroic act. Finally, we'll call the second layer of each picture the background. This is the part of the picture that appears to be farthest from the reader. Whoever or whatever is in the background of the pictures is often drawn to look smaller and to have less detail. So on the third panel of this Hugo Hercules strip, I'm using a lighter pink pen to indicate the background, where we see the building from which the safe fell, as well as 3 bystanders. Interesting to note here is that the safe, which was in the foreground of both the first panel and the second panel, so I'm circling it with red in both those panels, has now shifted toward the background of the third panel. You could say that Hugo Hercules has literally put it behind them by catching it and setting it down. Another thoughtful aspect of Koerner's art here is the way in which he uses all this black ink to draw the reader's eye toward the safe and toward Hugo Hercules, who has a black jacket. Fans of Westerns might notice, though, that he wears a white cowboy hat. Also, look at how Koerner carefully changes the position of the safe from the top left in the first panel to the bottom right in the third panel to show the passing of time in and between these 3 panels. So I'm picking up my darker red pen one last time to trace that motion with an arrow. Whew. There's a lot we could talk about, right, in just this 3-panel comic strip. But the most significant takeaway from this video is our basic comics terminology. You'll read a lot more terms in Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. But for now, if you at least understand the terms panel, gutter, dialogue, thought, narration, foreground, and background, we can move on to our first attempt at using the frameworks from a couple articles to analyze comics. As Hugo Hercules would say, just as easy.